Senator Ludlam.
Thank you. I just wanted to go to a couple of questions relating to women and kids fleeing domestic violence, which I believe is still the largest single cause of homelessness. Now, women who are older and maybe let's start with that. How will the Minister's direction that the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness funding will be focused on domestic violence be implemented? It seems like a sensible direction, but let's go to how you intend to do that.
So, Senator, the structure of the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness, the Commonwealth funds to $115 million per year, match funding then matched by the states and territories. The states and territories have the responsibility for identifying areas, service providers, and geographic footprint for service delivery. As you've pointed out, in announcing the new two-year homelessness agreement, Minister Morrison identified as two priority areas homelessness arising from domestic and family violence and youth homelessness. We are currently in negotiations with the states on the new agreement, including how that particular aspect of the Commonwealth's commitment will be implemented. We're proposing that at least 50% of Commonwealth funding be prioritised to services servicing those client groups.
Did you say 50%?
Yes, at least 50%
of the Commonwealth?
Of Commonwealth funding.
Okay,
yeah.
And you're discussing with the states how they carve up?
So we are currently in negotiations with the states about the agreement. The way we would envisage that would be implemented is under the partnership agreement, a detailed project plan has to be developed and implemented, and those project plans include indication of providers, funding, and types of services that are being delivered, and it would be through those project plans that we would monitor the implementation of the prioritisation.
And do those plans come in from the states and territories sort of one at a time? Are they on deadline?
So, Senator, again, still under negotiation with the jurisdictions, but what we are proposing is for a broad strategic overview of their plans to be lodged with us by 1 July, and more detailed project plans to be finalised with us by the 1st of September.
Okay, now 1 July and 1 September.
1st of September. We're looking at adopting that approach for this two-year agreement on the basis that, one, it is a two-year agreement, and two, some jurisdictions are interested in, given that there's a longer time frame, that they are wanting to look at their service delivery footprint and services, and that gives them additional time to be able to go through procurement processes and what have you.
Do the draft plans that are submitted to you and then the final ones that come on 1 September, do they end up being public documents, either at the state end or when they're lodged with you?
The project plans, it's proposed, Senator, that they be published on the Federal Financial Relations website.
Great.
With commercial in confidence information redacted.
Yeah. That would presumably be when they're in their final form in September rather than draft documents in July.
No, that's right, Senator.
Okay. Would you propose that the draft documents that are lodged with you in July are subject to any kind of consultation or review by those in the sector, or do you leave that to the states and territories to do?
So, Senator, this goes to the supremacy of states and territories in the homelessness service delivery space. Yes, they will. Okay. They will have the interactions with service providers, and our experience is that a number of them, if not most of them, in fact, have quite well established forums and engagement with their service providers.
Yeah. Okay. The states are responsible for that more direct delivery of services, but obviously they look to the Commonwealth's taxing powers to provide a lot of the funds, not all, but a lot. In the 2014-15 budget, the $44 million capital program for new homeless and domestic violence shelters was cut. It hasn't been reinstated in the 15-16 budget that I'm aware of. What was the basis for cutting that funding? Who made that decision, and on what grounds was it made?
So in the context of the 14-15 agreement, Senator, it was determined that the agreement would focus on service delivery.
Without any... Okay, that's the practical impact, I guess. Doesn't go to what was your understanding of who made that decision, and on what grounds was it made to not provide for any further expansion of shelters for people fleeing domestic violence or finding themselves homeless?
Well, that was a government decision in the previous budget, Senator.
It was, and presumably a government decision to not reinstate that funding. I might properly direct this question to you, Senator, for your Advance Wells, if that's appropriate.
I think Senator Ludlam remember that when we came into government, there had been no provisions made. Funding had been cut, and we extended these agreements for 2 years.
Yep.
And so 1 year in the first instance, and then
two.
thank you, Mr. Pratt. 1 year in the first instance, and then again. So can I just make very, very clear that we have given priority to frontline services and the need for frontline services to continue. And given what we inherited, we have made sure that frontline services were continued, and that was the decision that we made as a government.
Senator, we won't know whether a Labor government would have continued to fund the capital projects, the new shelters.
We do know.
But we don't,
Senator
because they didn't
Ludlam,
deliver the
because
budget you did.
They made no provisions in the forward estimates for funding.
But that's reasonably common. I don't think it's fair to say that it didn't exist, because they weren't given the opportunity to hand a budget down.
I read into forward estimates the intention of a government to do or not do something, and we inherited a situation where the funding was going to cease. So to me, that indicated a clear intention by the previous government not to pursue funding in this space. And we came into government and we chose to ensure that frontline services were continued.
Okay.
And that was the decision that we made.
I'm getting time checked by the chair, so I'll move us from...
I'm just making the point, Senator Ludlam, because your assertions were incorrect, and I'm correcting your assertions.
Thank you. I think that's points well made.
Indeed. Let's move towards this government rather than rehashing the previous government. I'm actually much more interested in what happens next.
So, sorry, Senator, could I also just point out
Thanks.
that under the National Affordable Housing Agreement, there is also a $260 million element that is homelessness as well, and that is available for capital use as well.
Okay.
So the partnership, the homelessness partnership agreement, yes, is one important contribution the Commonwealth makes, but the funding under NAHA is also relevant here.
Okay. I'm happy to take this on the basis of what you inherited and where you see it now, if we're looking at what occurred upon the change of government and where this government's taking this portfolio. What's the current gap? What's the measure of the current gap, the service shortfall for domestic violence shelters and shelters for others seeking emergency accommodation for whatever reason? Let's talk about the present day.
Senator, we don't have that information available. I'm thinking that this might be better discussed with family safety under...
Conceivably, we may, we will check
We'll
whether or not they have information in this area. Yeah. I mean, in terms of your question, I mean, I think we know that currently about a third of services provided by the homelessness services funded through the NPAR go to women and children who are fleeing family or domestic violence. colleagues have identified that the government is seeking to increase the priority placed on that type of servicing in the 2-year agreement from July. So I think you can take from that there is a recognition that this is an incredibly important area. It already is heavily resourced and is being further resourced as a result of recent government decisions.
I'm trying to get a sense, and a sense with some data would be really appreciated, of the gap between what is being provisioned and what is actually needed. So I would have thought it would be well within your domain to be able to tell me, for example, about turnaway rates. How many women fleeing domestic violence turn up at a shelter, assuming that they know that it's there, and are told that they can't be assisted at that particular time? That would give us some idea of the scale of need, I would have thought.
This may be information we can get from the report on government services, so we'll take that on notice.
Okay.
I'll make this the last one. Senator Ludlam.
Okay. So women who are older and living alone will be poorer than men of the same...
Sorry, to interrupt, we do apparently have that information.
So
Do you want to, if there's a fair bit there, do you want to just table that for us? Just
Senator, the principal bit of data I can report to you is from the AHW Specialist Homelessness Services, where the report suggests that of the order of about 420 requests for services are not met daily. Now, sorry, that's not specific to domestic violence. That is...
That's overall?
That is overall.
So I might put this on notice to the Minister. What is the government... Does the government intend to close that gap and meet that unmet need? And if so, what timescale do you have in mind? Have you set any targets? Do you intend to set any targets?
Well, I think the extension of the funding certainly is in relation to provide certainty in future funding arrangements, but let's not forget that we do have on foot a series of considerations, and in particular the white paper reform on federation, which does have the housing and homelessness component. So
understand that,
that's
Senator.
where we're coming
I'm just
from.
checking to see whether you heard the question I just put to you about whether the government has any targets. If it's 400 or thereabouts turned away every day, I mean, we could pause if you like and imagine what that statistic actually looks like in real life, the circumstances that these women are fleeing. Does the government have any intention to set any timelines or targets for reducing the number of people turned away?
Senator Ludlam, I will take that on notice and refer that to the Minister and give you a response.
Okay. My final question, and thank you for that, and thank you for the Chair's patience as well, is a little more general. Women who are older and living alone will be poorer than men of equivalent age. They'll be less able to maintain home ownership and also less able to compete in the private rental market for affordable accommodation. And it's now, I think, reasonably well established that older women who are living alone will be less well off, less wealthy than men of their age, and less able to retain home ownership or compete in the private rental market. I wonder whether the government has a strategy to deal with that problem, and whether you have any data on the profile of women accessing homelessness services. So, for example, is it changing in line with that general trend of older women simply not being able to compete for private rentals or home ownership?
I think we would want to take that on notice, Senator.
The broader question, yes, Senator, I can report that just in terms of the basic demographic data, again, under the Specialist Homelessness Services, around 7% of clients were 55 years or over.
All right. Anything you can provide us about trends, but more importantly, what the Australian government actually intends to do about that? Because I think it's reasonably well understood that that's what's happening.
All right.
Thanks
you.
very much, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just finish off my